What is up, guys? I'm your friendly neighborhood web war fanatic, and if you guys do not know, Wonder Man was just announced as a new hero who's coming out in Marvel Champions. He will be releasing in February 2026, but I am super duper hyped for this hero and the cards that we've seen so far. So I've been speculating for what type of deck that I want to build with Wonder Man. So this would just be a quick, fun, short video talking about how I plan on, deck building for Wonder Man and how I plan on playing him. So in this video, I'll be giving a quick summary of how Wonder Man works and what his shtick is, and then I'll be going over some key cards that I want to include whenever I'm deck building for him, and the specific synergies that those cards, have with parts of his kit. And then finally, I'll go over the exact deck list that I have planned for Wonder Man, and I'll lay it all out on the screen for you guys to see. So really quickly, let's jump into, how Wonder Man works. He has 2 thwart, 1 attack, 2 defense, 5 hand size in hero form, 6 hand size in alter ego, 12 hit points all across, 3 recovery, and he has the aerial and Avengers traits, and he also has a civilian trait in his alter ego. He has a very cool deck building ability here called Ionic Energy Being, where you may include events with the printed energy resource icon from any aspect in your deck. So if you declare that you are playing him in the justice aspect, you can still include, events that are protection or leadership or aggression, as long as they have a printed energy resource. So you can put something like a repurpose in the deck if you want to, even if you are not playing Wonder Man in protection. And with the setup here, you put the Ionic Physiology, this upgrade, into play, which is right here. So this upgrade is permanent, you can never get rid of it. It's max 3 cards tucked here, and as a response, note that it's not a forced response, so you do not have to trigger this effect if you don't want to, but you probably do sometimes. After you play an event with the printed energy resource, you tuck that event from your discard pile underneath this card, and you heal 1 damage from your identity. So basically, Wonder Man here, he wants 3 tuck cards here, because with this constant effect in hero form, power recycling, he gets +1 attack for each card tucked underneath the Ionic Physiology right here. And as a forced response, so this one is forced, so you have to trigger it. After Wonder Man makes a basic attack, so after you exhaust him to attack, you must discard each card tucked under the Ionic Physiology. So basically, if you have 3 tuck cards here, Wonder Man's attack set goes up to 4, but then after he makes a basic attack, you lose all those 3 cards, and then he drops back down to 1. We've also already seen the majority of Wonder Man's events, and I want to give a huge shout out to Chris Deutsch, who commented, on my video where I was doing my initial impressions for Wonder Man, and he counted the cards that we've seen, so we know how many copies that we're going to have, based off the number down here. So for active altruism, this is Wonder Man's Thor event. He's going to have 3 copies of this card, in his identity specific kit. He's going to have 2 copies of the Ionic Blast, and then 3 copies of Starstruck here as well, and these are the 2 attack events. So he will have 5 attack events here, and then 3 Thor events. So the active altruism, it's a 0 cost event, so it's free to play. Here, action Thor, remove 1 threat from a scheme. So at worst, it's 0 cost to remove 1 threat. Then you can remove 2 additional threat from that scheme for each energy resource that you overpaid for this card, up to a max of 2 energy resources. So we do want to build Wonder Man's deck with a bunch of energy resources so that we can overpay for these cards and get extra effects, right? So if you pay 1 energy resource for active altruism, it's going to be considered overpaying because it's more than its printed cost here of 0. So you can do 3 threat removal. If you use 2 energy resources, then it's going to do 5 threat removal for that 2 cost, which is very, very efficient. And then for his first attack event here, the Ionic Blast, which he has 2 copies of, 1 cost event, here action attack, do 3 damage to enemy, so 1 for 3, it's okay. And you can deal 2 additional damage to the enemy for each energy resource that you overpay for the card to a max of 3. So if you pay for this, with 1 mental resource for its regular cost, overpay with the energy resource, so you're paying, 2 costs for this card, it's going to do 5 damage. If you pay, double energy resources and like 1 random resource for, 3 costs, then it's going to do 7 damage, which is a little bit under the curve. And then you can also pay 4 costs for this card. If at least 3 of those resources are energies, then you can do 9 damage to enemies. So this didn't get really high, but it's very modular, right? You have a lot of versatility if you just want to defeat like a weaker minion, or if you want to deal more damage, to beat a more tough elite minion, or if you want to do more damage to the villain, for example. And Starstruck here, he has 3 copies of this card in his kit. Hero action attack, do damage to an enemy equal to your attack. If you overpay for this card with the energy resource, you can also stun that enemy. Okay, so one thing to note about Starstruck here is that it's essentially the exact same thing as a Quick Strike, but just straight up better, right? Quick Strike is that 2 cost, aggression event where you can do damage to an enemy equal to your attack stat. And Starstruck here, you do damage to an enemy equal to your attack stat, but it's only 1 cost. And if you want to overpay for it with the energy resource, you can also stun an enemy and get that kicker. What the cool thing about this card is that you're dealing damage with the attack event, so you're not making a basic attack. So it's going to bypass this force response here, and it will not proc if you play an attack event because Wonder Man is not making a base attack. And since the attack event is still using, his attack stat, if you have 3 cards tucked under the Ionic Physiology and his attack stat of 4, then Starstruck would do 4 damage for just 1 cost, which is, very good. Wonder Man also has the Energy Siphon here, so it's his resource card. As a Hero Interrupt, when you spend this card, take up to 3 damage. You can generate an additional energy resource for each damage taken this way. So this can be, one single resource if you don't want to proc this. It can be a double resource, a triple resource, or a quadra resource, which is pretty crazy. And thanks to Chris Deutsch, we know that we will have 2 copies of this card, in his kit. Wonder Man also has, in my opinion, the key card in his build, which is Mr. Hollywood. It's a 1-cost upgrade, and as a resource, you can generate an energy resource to overpay for a card, limit once per card. So note that this card does not exhaust. You cannot generate the energy resource to pay for a card, but you can do it to overpay for a card. It's limit once per card, but if, for example, you have 3 copies of the active altruism in your hand, you can still use Mr. Hollywood 3 times in 1 turn for each copy of the active altruism because you can use it multiple times, per phase. So if you play the active altruism here for 0 cost and you overpay with 1 energy resource generated by the Mr. Hollywood here, then you're playing the 0 cost story event to remove 3 threat. And you can do it, 3 times, in 1 turn, which is pretty insane efficiency. That is very, very good there. And he also has the Jet Belt. It's a 2-cost upgrade. As a hero resource, you can exhaust this to generate an energy resource, but only for an event. Or you can use the hero resource here to exhaust the Jet Belt and discard a tuck card underneath the Ionic Physiology to generate an energy resource, which can go for anything. It can go for paying for a card, for overpaying for a card. That can also go towards paying for an ally, for an upgrade, for support, whatever that you want. But you do lose a tuck card underneath the Ionic Physiology. So as of right now, there is still 3 cards that we do not know in Wonder Man's kit, but I've seen enough to know that I really like him, and I know exactly how I want to play him. So like we talked about earlier, Starstruck is very similar to Quick Strike, and that is exactly the way that I want to play Wonder Man. I am very excited to play Wonder Man in an aggression build, building up his attack, and doing Quick Strike-like stuff. So in Marvel Champions, there's a pretty popular archetype with Quick Strike and Brute Force. Basically, Brute Force is this cheap 1-cost upgrade that gives your hero, +1 attack, so you can play multiple copies and get +3 attack. And since that is a force response on Brute Force, you do have to discard whenever you make a base attack. And that looks very familiar, just like Wonder Man's force response here. After Wonder Man makes a base attack, you have to discard each card tucked under the Ionic Physiology and then make his attack stat go back down to 1. So basically for Wonder Man here, as long as he's not attacking, you can build up his attack with the Ionic Physiology and with the Brute Force and get his attacks to, +3 here, +3 if you have 3 cards of Brute Force. Get him to 7 attack there. But if he makes a basic attack, you lose all that. But if you don't make a basic attack and you play a card like Starstruck, where you can do 7 damage for 1 cost, which is absolutely insane. You can also just have Wonder Man exhaust the Thwart, and I think that this build will be so fun and so powerful with Wonder Man. So typically, I'm not the biggest fan of these Quick Strike builds where you're playing Quick Strike to do damage because it's typically a little bit too slow to really be effective against those higher difficulty scenarios like Expert Ronin or Expert Venom Goblin, and there's not that much of a benefit to getting your attack stat high other than playing, Smash a Problem to remove threat or playing that Quick Strike, right? But Wonder Man gives you that additional benefit with the Starstruck here. And there's another key card that's really good with Wonder Man, keeping his attack stat high, and that's the Unified Strike here. So know that this is a leadership card, so normally you cannot combine this with a Brute Force strategy, but Wonder Man can, because like we saw earlier, his deck building ability, you can include events with a printed energy resource from any aspect in your deck. So I want to have 3 copies of the Unified Strike in my deck. This 0-cost event here is a Hero Interrupt. When an ally uses a basic power, exhaust your hero, so you get exhausted, and you can add your hero's mashing power to that ally's power for this use. The ally does not take consequential damage for this use. Guys, that's insane. I talked about the art before. The art is really cool. It's thematic, but also it works out perfectly here with Wonder Man. So I'm going to have the Wolverine ally, in my deck here as well. And Wolverine exhaust to attack, he takes 2 consequential damage, and his attack's at piercing. Well, if I use the Unified Strike with Wolverine, we're tossing Wolverine here for like a lunging strike, basically, the Wolverine ally. And he's going to pierce off, do 3 damage plus whatever Wonder Man's attack is. So if we have his attack at 7, Wolverine's going to do 7 damage. We exhaust Wonder Man, and Wolverine will not take 2 consequential damage. That is so powerful, guys, and super duper fun and super duper thematic. In addition to getting his attack stat up to 7 with the 3 copies of Brute Force and the Ionic Physiology, I also want to include a combat training to give him +1 more attack, and I also want to give him a copy of the Aggressive Conditioning, which is a new aggression upgrade that will be coming out in Tiger's Precon deck to give him an additional 3 hit points and 1 more attack. So we can get Wonder Man's attack here to 9, which is crazy to have this one cost event, do 9 damage, or we can play Smash the Problem to exhaust him and remove 9 threat from a scheme. And of course, we can use the Unified Strike as well to exhaust Wonder Man and then give that ally your hero's matching power. And I think the big thing that really makes this work is that Wonder Man has a base store setup too. So he can always just exhaust every single turn to remove 2 threats, so it doesn't necessarily feel like you're wasting your basic activation by not exhausting to attack. You can always store it or defend as well. Okay, let's jump over to the deck here. So of course, the core card, we want to have 3 copies of Brute Strength in the deck so we can build out Wonder Man's attack. We also want to have a copy of Combat Training and the Aggressive Conditioning to build out the attack even further, up to 9. I do want to note that if you include Specialized Training, it's a player side scheme with 5 per player threat. If you clear off that side scheme, we can attach the Combat Specialist to Wonder Man and give him, +1 more attack, getting his attack stat to 10. Okay, that's really powerful, but I don't necessarily feel like the Combat Specialist is worth it for Wonder Man because you want to exhaust to make basic attacks to draw a card from Combat Specialist, and removing 5 per player threat to only get the +1 attack, I don't think it's going to be necessarily worth it, and getting a 9 attack is already plenty high enough to get a lot of value from Smash the Problem, Unified Strike, and from Starstruck. So personally, I won't be including the Specialized Training, but it's definitely not bad to include to have even more fun and get the attack stats to 10. For supports here, we have the basic Avengers Mansion, the Helicarrier, and the Quincarrier. I think that is just solid resource generators for Wonder Man, especially because he's an Avenger. He can use the Quincarrier, which can generate a wild resource, which we probably want to be an energy resource every single turn for those events to help overpay for that. And Wonder Man would easily be able to afford these cards with his Energy Siphon, his resource card, which can potentially be a quadra resource. So yeah, I definitely want to include these supports here to build out his economy. And of course, we also want the 3 basic doubles here. So I have the Energy, Genius, and Strength. Hopefully we get some new art on these cards. I always look forward to new arts here for the resource cards. And then for the player side schemes here, I only have 1 player side scheme in the deck, which is a Superpower Training, because I do feel like Mr. Hollywood, that title card, is essential to making Wonder Man's kit run smoothly. So I really want to get that out as early as possible, and Wonder Man will have no trouble throwing out the 3 per player threat with his Thor event and with his basic Thor set of 2. I also highly consider including a copy of Death Focus in the deck, but Wonder Man only has 5 targets for that, his 3 copies of Starstruck and his 2 copies of Ionic Blast, so I didn't really feel like it would be that worth it. We also have the Helicarrier to reduce the cost of cards down to 0 if we want to, and since Helicarrier works for anything, I thought that it would be a little bit better. And I don't particularly care about playing those attack events, especially early game whenever I'm trying to get built out, and that's usually the most pivotal point of a game, that early game to get set up. Moving on to the ally lineup, I plan on having 7 allies in the deck, and I want each one of these allies to have really good synergy with how this deck works. So like I mentioned earlier, I think that the Wolverine Aggression ally is so good here as a 4-cost ally, 1 Thor, 3 attack, takes 2 consequential damage for attacking, but his attacks have piercing, and as a response after your turn begins, heal 1 damage from Wolverine. So he's a great ally that you want to actually keep in play for a long time because he can attack with piercing, takes 2 consequential damage, and then if you play a Unified Strike the next turn, he won't be taking consequential damage for that next attack, but he'll also be healing that damage up. So very, very powerful here to have allies that want to stay in play for a long time, not just having allies with on-play effects. Another ally in a similar vein is 2 Gun Kid here, which is a new ally that will be in Tigra's Precon deck, 3-cost aggression ally with 1 thwart, 2 attack, and 3 hit points here. But as interrupt, whenever 2 Gun Kid makes a basic attack, choose 2 enemies instead of 1 and resolve this attack against each of them. Okay, so if we have Unified Strike here for that attack, then we're having 2 Gun Kid, attack for 2, plus potentially 9 with Wonder Man's attack. So 2 Gun Kid can hit for 11 on 2 enemies and not take consequential damage. Guys, that is crazy, crazy value. So he's definitely another ally that I want to include here. And then we also have the Wasp ally, the Janet Van Dyne. She has 3 attack, 1 thwart, but she gets +1 hit point for each pim counter on her. As an intro, whenever she enters play, place 1 pim counter on her to a max of 3 for each energy resource that you overpaid for her cost. So if we have her in play, we can just play her with just a Mr. Hollywood if we don't have any other resource in our hand, because Mr. Hollywood can overpay energy resources for cards, which is exactly what Wasp wants there. So very good synergy there. Note that these three allies do not have a printed energy resource. Wolverine has a printed physical, Wasp and Two Gun can have a printed mental. So we actually want to have more energy resources, to use that to overpay for the events. But these three allies here I thought were just so good with Unified Strike and with this deck and with Wonder Man's kit that I just had to include them. The last four allies in this deck will have that printed energy resource. And the first one that we'll be taking a look at is the Thor ally here, Asgard Avenger. 1 Thor, 3 attack, but he takes 2 constant damage for attacking. Well, we love that with Unified Strike because he won't be taking consequential damage at all if Wonder Man tosses him, right? He comes in with toughness, but also as an interrupt, whenever Thor attacks a minion engaged with the player, we can spend an energy resource. Well, we have tons of energy resources in this deck. You can resolve this attack against each minion engaged with that player in the order of your choice. Guys, if we Unified Strike Thor's attack, AoE to every single minion engaged with you, and you take no consequential damage, that is crazy. You can potentially do like 10 plus damage if you try to build up and swarm a bunch of minions. Really good value here from Thor. The next ally is going to be Sunfire. Sunfire has an on-play effect, which isn't really what we want with the allies from this deck because it won't synergize with the Unified Strike. But Sunfire, in my opinion, is the best aggression ally. Just very, very efficient, and he has a very powerful response. So after you play him from your hand, spend an energy resource. We have so many energy resources. Choose an attachment with the text hero action or hero response and discard it immediately. So powerful, you can take off Magneto's helmet, Magneto's armor, you can take off, those nasty attachments from Ultron, which require you to exhaust. So much good stuff there with Sunfire. I definitely want to include him. Even if you're not in a situation where you have a nasty villain attachment to discard, Sunfire is still just a great 2-cost ally with good stats for being 2 costs, and he's a printed energy resource. The next ally that we have here is a basic ally, Snow Guard. 4-cost ally with a printed energy resource, 0 thwart, 0 attack, and 3 hit points. But as a response, after Snow Guard enters play, plays up to 3 shift counters here, and while the shift counters here are equal to X, she gets that corresponding 1. So you can either choose to have her have plus 3 attack, plus 3 thwart, or have her have plus 5 hit points and retaliate 1. We usually want to choose either the attack or thwart because with Unified Front, she won't be taking consequential damage. Add that attack and thwart to Wonder Man's stats. I mean, that's just a lot of value there. And then the final ally in this deck is Gambit here. And Gambit also has an on-play effect, but I still think that he has synergy with this deck. So Gambit here, his response after he enters play, look at the top 3 cards of the encounter deck and then tuck 1 under him so only the boost field is available. Well, if we can hit a 3 booster or a 4 booster with Gambit, you can potentially keep him play for a very long time with Unified Strike because he won't be taking consequential damage. So let's say you're able to get an encounter card with the boost icon of 3. Well, that's very, very high to have Gambit have 3 thwart, 3 attack. He can thwart for 3, and the next turn he can thwart for 3 again. You can play a Unified Strike, add Wonder Man's thwart stat of 2 to Gambit, have him thwart for 5. He won't take consequential damage from that thwart, so he still has 2 remaining hit points to thwart for 2 future turns. Very, very good value there. At worst, even if Gambit gets like a very low attack or thwart stat, you're at least scrying the encounter deck so you know what the boost card and the encounter card will be if you're playing true solo. He's just a very solid ally either way. Finally, let's move on to the events here. So of course, like I talked about, we have 3 copies of Unified Strike. This card is so good with Wonder Man. Even though we are playing an aggression deck, we can include this with his deck building ability. It works with all his allies that we just talked about. And then we also have 3 copies of Smash the Problem here. It's a thwart event, cost 1. Hero action thwart, exhaust your hero to remove threat from a scheme equal to your hero's attack. So if Wonder Man gets his attack to 9, you can thwart for 9, and you can use that exhaust because we're not using that exhaust to attack anyways because we want to keep those brute forces and keep the Ionic Physiology having those 3 cards. And there we go, guys. This is a 40 card deck, one that I definitely plan on playing with Wonder Man, and I'm super excited for him to release so I can try this deck out. One thing to know about this deck is that this is a Quick Strike deck, but I have no copies of Quick Strike in the deck. And I very heavily debated if I should put Quick Strike in or not, but I just feel like with 3 copies of Starstruck, I mean, it's just a superior version, and we also have 2 copies of the Ionic Blast as well, so we have 5 attack defense anyways. I would rather have more thwarting with the Smasher Problem in addition to his 3 thwart events. I think that you can definitely swap out a copy of Smasher Problem, put in a Quick Strike, or just strictly add in 1 or 2 more copies of Quick Strike for a 41 card deck or a 42 card deck. Personally, I feel like Wonder Man has enough damage anyways, but that's definitely just a playstyle preference, right? Like if you're like late game and Wonder Man has 2 copies of the Starstruck in his hand, he can play both of them. That's like 9 plus 9, 18 damage, and he can still exhaust to make a base attack for 9 for 27 damage. damage, and if that kills the enemy, it doesn't matter that you discard Brute Force or lose the tech cards from Ionic Physiology because the villain's dead. So yeah, that is my future deck breakdown here for what I plan on building with Wonder Man. Let me know down in the comments, what do you guys think of this deck? Are there improvements that I could make? And if you have any deck name ideas, let me know down in the comments. I might use them if you're okay with me using them. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this fun speculative video here. Let me know what decks are you planning to play Wonder Man with, and I'll see you guys all in the next video.